Shalom. Of all the feast days of Yahweh, the 8th day may be the least known, because the full majesty of it is, in a way, hidden within the Scriptures. Many times it's been mistakenly grouped together as a part of the Feast of Tabernacles, but they are two completely separate events. To understand the true meaning of the 8th day, one must search the Scriptures while understanding both the feasts and also the context of the times that they lived in to see it. This is the 8th day invitation. We start in Leviticus 23, verse 4. These are the feasts to Yahweh, set-apart convocations, which you shall call in their seasons. When you look at the word convocations in the Greek from the Septuagint, G2822, klete, that word does not mean just a normal gathering or an assembly. G2822 is defined as invited or called, such as a banquet that one is invited to. This is a special assembly. These are his set-apart invitations. These are set-apart callings that we are invited to. Yah is calling out to the world and waiting for people to accept his invitation. And this word klete, G2822, that is translated as convocations in Leviticus 23, verse 4, is also used in the New Testament. One place that G2822 is used is in Matthew 22, verse 14, where Messiah says, "For many are called, but few are chosen." Called is the same word, G2822. So reading his words again, "For many are invited, but few are chosen." Remember from other messages that we endeavor to keep these feasts at his appointed times, and they are his feasts, and that we are to be set apart as he is set apart. We are all invited to receive the things that he has set up for us, but many don't truly accept the covenant of his invitation. As mentioned, to really understand the 8th day, one must first know about the Feast of Tabernacles. The Feast of Tabernacles lasts 7 days with a high Sabbath on the first day. Tabernacles is in the 7th month from the 15th day through the 21st day. The 8th day is on the 22nd day of the 7th month, which is the day after the Feast of Tabernacles ends. And the 8th day is the last high Sabbath of his appointed times, his Muadim, or his feast days. There are 7 high Sabbaths in his feast days, and the 8th day is the 7th high Sabbath, the last one, the finale of his feast for that year. In Exodus 23, verse 14, Yah says, "Keep a feast to me 3 times in the year." So focusing in on the Feast of Tabernacles, which leads into the 8th day, "You shall keep for yourself the Feast of Tabernacles 7 days. And you shall rejoice in your feast, you and your son and your daughter, the people that work for you, the priest, others that are in need that we need to help, and the stranger." So all of native Israel is supposed to rejoice in the feast, but then also the stranger, beginning with the mixed multitude that left Egypt with Israel during the Exodus. And yes, even now, Gentiles by birth, but now grafted in as a part of spiritual Israel, everyone is called to his feasts. All of us. 7 days you shall keep a feast to Yahweh your Elohim in the place which he has chosen for himself. And 3 times in the year shall all males appear before Yahweh in the place that he has chosen. The 3 times a year that all are called to appear before him are for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Sevenths, better known as the Feast of Weeks, and for the Feast of Tabernacles. When the first temple was built by Solomon, and through the time of Messiah, all of Israel went to the place where he told them to build the temple, where he called his name. Israel went to Jerusalem. 3 times a year, all of Israel would leave their homes and go to Jerusalem. The first time was for the first set of spring feasts, which was Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the Day of First Fruits. They're all grouped together. But the people of Israel are not just coming from Jerusalem and the surrounding towns like Bethlehem. They're coming from Carmel. They're coming from Elath and the southern Negev desert. They're coming from the Galilee. It's a 4 or 5 day journey from some of these places to get to Jerusalem. So they're going to have to get there early enough to keep the Passover in Jerusalem, just like we see in Luke chapter 2. Now his parents, the parents of our Messiah, went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he was 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. And when they had fulfilled the days, as they returned, the child Yahushua tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother did not know of it. Have you ever noticed that Messiah's parents diligently kept the feasts? There it is. So all of Israel came together to Jerusalem for Passover. The very next day begins the 7 days of the Feast of Unleavened Bread that they are called to attend, and the Day of First Fruits occurs at that time also. After that, they all go back home. 7 weeks later, they have to come back the second time to rejoice over one day, the Feast of the Sevenths, and then they travel back home again. And then about 4 months later, just after the Day of Atonement, they travel back the third time to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles and also the 8th day. Remember that the 15th day of the 7th month starts the Feast of Tabernacles. The day after the 7th and last day of the Feast of Tabernacles is the 8th day. They're back to back. Also note that the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles is a high Sabbath. They won't be traveling on that high Sabbath. They will be there before that high Sabbath because traveling is work, especially in those days. So they would be there for the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, and they would not leave until Tabernacles was over. The scripture clearly says to keep the 7-day Feast of Tabernacles. But the next day is the 8th day, and the 8th day is also a high Sabbath. So again, they won't start traveling back home on the 8th day, on that high Sabbath. They would stay for that added day, the 8th day, resting, rejoicing at the temple, and worshiping. And then the day after the 8th day, they would go back to wherever their homes were, whether it was down the street in Old Jerusalem or a 4 or 5 day journey back to the region of Galilee. Now when they arrived for the Feast of Tabernacles, they were all called to build sukkahs, which are temporary booths or tents, and also called tabernacles. And they would dwell in the tents for the entire 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. And on the first day you shall take goodly fruit of trees, and branches of palm trees, and thick boughs of trees, and willows, and branches from the brook, to rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim 7 days in the year. 7 days you shall dwell in tabernacles. Every native in Israel shall dwell in tents. Consider how many people traveled to Jerusalem for the feast. King David's census counted over 1.5 million men able to draw a sword. So even if only some of the families of the men also traveled to Jerusalem with them, it's likely that in excess of 3 million people congregated upon Jerusalem for the feasts. That's a lot of people. And ancient Jerusalem within the walls was a relatively small town. So the land around Jerusalem had well over 1 million tents set up by all the people that had traveled to Jerusalem for the feast. And then after the 7-day Feast of Tabernacles is over, it is the 8th day. Now with that understanding of the Feast of Tabernacles, we can start digging into the Word to understand the 8th day. In both Leviticus 23:36 and in Numbers 29:35, it is called the 8th day, or Yom Shamini. The 8th day shall be a set-apart convocation to you. Remember, that's a set-apart invitation. You shall offer whole burnt offerings to Yahweh. In the old days, that meant bringing sacrifices, but now that means bringing ourselves, loving Him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And as we honor Him with our faith, worship, obedience, and mercy to others, we offer unto Him ourselves as spiritual sacrifices, spiritual whole burnt offerings unto Him. It is a time of release. You shall do no work. This day is a high Sabbath. But a time of release is an interesting phrase. It's a translation of a single Greek word in the Septuagint. It's not listed in the Strong Concordance, as this word is not used in the New Testament. However, a Greek lexicon of the ancient Roman and Greek periods published in 1900 shows that the Greek word for this phrase, a time of release, means a finale or an ending. It also says solemn assembly, but the true meaning of the word, when you go back to the original usage in the Greek language, is finale, ending, stoppage. So Yah is saying that this is a time of the end. We will now keep digging into the scriptures to get a better understanding of this 8th day that's been shrouded in some misunderstanding. One place we can see the 8th day is in 2 Chronicles. Chapters 5 through 7 shows how Solomon gathered all of Israel together to celebrate the ending of the fall feast, starting with the Feast of Tabernacles. 2 Chronicles 5 verse 3 says that Solomon gathered all of Israel, assembled unto the king for the feast in the 7th month. Solomon decreed per the commandment that all of Israel was to come to Jerusalem to attend the Feast of Tabernacles. And by the way, he had just finished building the first temple and the altar. Israel was going to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles and the completion of the temple and the dedication of the altar all at the same time. And that's what you'll find in the rest of chapters 5 and 6. When you get to chapter 7, there are a few interesting verses. And on the 8th day, Solomon kept a solemn assembly, for he kept a feast of 7 days as the dedication to the altar, the Feast of Tabernacles. The solemn assembly here means the finale. Solomon kept the finale. He kept the ending of it. And then on the 23rd day of the 7th month, he dismissed the people, and they went to their tents, their encampments, rejoicing with a glad heart. That gives us one small clue. Notice that it said that Solomon dismissed everyone to their tents, their encampments, on the 23rd day of the 7th month. That was the day after the 8th day. Solomon did not dismiss Israel after the Feast of Tabernacles. The nation of Israel was only dismissed after the 8th day was over. But Jerusalem at the time of Solomon was very small. It was still during the time that the 12 tribes were living in their allotted lands all across the land of Israel. The few thousand that lived in or around Jerusalem could go back to their houses after the last day of Tabernacles, after they had stayed in their tents for 7 days. And then, of course, they returned to the temple to celebrate the 8th day. But for all the people that came from Galilee or Elath or wherever, from far away, they would have stayed in their tent, the booth that they had made the entire time until Solomon dismissed them, for both the 7 days of Tabernacles and also the 8th day, 8 days in total. The instruction in Leviticus 23:42 says to dwell in the tent that they have made for 7 days total. Were they breaking the commandment by staying in the tent an extra day? The answer is no. Our Heavenly Father gives us His instructions from the heart, as Messiah showed us. Yah knew that these people had come from far away. They had built a tent, and they had nowhere else to sleep. They couldn't go back to their houses. It's a multi-day journey. The 8th day is a high Sabbath anyway, so no one was going to travel or build another enclosure. He rules over us with love, and we keep His commandments with love. There's also a few historical accounts pertaining to the 8th day. There were 2 Judean historians from the 1st century that mentioned the 8th day in their writings. One of them was Josephus. In the Antiquities of the Jews, he states that upon the 15th day of the same month, the 7th month, when the season of the year is beginning to change to winter, the law enjoins us to pitch tabernacles. And then he says, on the 8th day, all work is laid aside. That's one historical witness to the scriptures. Another historian from earlier in the 1st century is Philo, and he wrote, the last of all the annual feasts is that which is called the Feast of Tabernacles, which is fixed for the season of the autumn equinox. So after that festival has lasted 7 days, that festival being the Feast of Tabernacles, he adds the 8th as a seal, calling it a kind of crowning feast, not only as it would seem to this festival, the Feast of Tabernacles, but also to all of the feasts of the year, which we have celebrated and enumerated, for it is the last feast of the year and a very stable and set-apart sort of conclusion, befitting all who have now received all produce of the land and who are no longer in perplexity and apprehension respecting any barrenness or scarcity. So they've made it through the year. They've collected their bounty from the harvest. They're set until the next year. And this is the feast day that is set aside for everyone that now has rest from their labors and is in no need of perplexity. Those are extra clues. Note that Philo said that he adds the 8th day. We can find more clues from the book of Jubilees. Jubilees was found in the caves of Qumran between 1947 and 1956, along with the other Dead Sea Scrolls. There were approximately 15 copies of the Book of Jubilees found among those scroll fragments. There were more copies of Jubilees found in the Dead Sea Scrolls than almost any of the other books of the Old Testament. Only Psalms, Deuteronomy, Isaiah, Exodus, and Genesis had more copies found at Qumran than the Book of Jubilees. We can see Jubilees is an ancient book. The Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran were deserted about 70 AD, about 25 years before the book of Revelation was written. And the fragments of Jubilees that were found at Qumran were all in Hebrew. not even in Aramaic. That means they were older copies. And the fact that the surviving Hebrew fragments of Jubilees are from at least 12 different manuscripts and that they were found in at least 3 different caves of Qumran indicates that the Book of Jubilees enjoyed considerable popularity and reverence among the Qumran community. So Philo wrote about the 8th day as a day that's been added. He adds the 8th day as a seal. The Book of Jubilees says the same thing, that Jacob called this feast day addition, for this day was added. And the former days he called the feast, and it was revealed to him that he should celebrate it. So we have the Book of Jubilees and Philo both telling us that the 8th day is a day of addition. And then the Book of Jubilees also tells us that the well-known name at the time for what we call the Feast of Tabernacles today was called the Feast. Israel had the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Feast of the Sevenths, but the Feast of Tabernacles is what they called the Feast. Okay, so we've looked at some scripture and some historical accounts that gives us some clues about the 8th day, but we really don't have a whole lot of understanding yet. But we will use those pieces together with this next book where most of our understanding of the 8th day comes from. And it comes from a book that everybody has likely read numerous times. It's all there in the book of John. It really shouldn't be surprising because our Messiah came as the prophet to show us all things and to fulfill our understanding. We start in John chapter 7. Now the Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. Messiah's brothers went up before him. They wanted him to come up with them, but Messiah said, "No, I must tarry." And then Yahusha also went up to the feast, not openly, but as it were in secret. 1,000 years after the time of King Solomon, when Messiah was walking in Judea, things had changed some. The northern kingdom of Israel had been scattered. 10 of the 12 tribes were dispersed. Judea had been pushed and conquered multiple times. It had almost been conquered by the Assyrians, and then it was conquered by the Babylonians, and then the Medes, then by Alexander the Great, and then by the Seleucian Empire. Now, Rome is the conquering empire. Through these centuries of uncertainty and shrinking borders, many people had left the countryside, the allotments of their tribes, and had congregated to the city, and Jerusalem is now much larger. The people from Galilee would obviously still have to make the trip for the feasts, but a large number of Judeans no longer had to travel to the feast. They were already in and around Jerusalem. But everybody still had to build a tent and dwell in it for 7 days, whether they had a nearby house or not. Then in John 7:14, about the midst of the feast, Messiah went up to the temple and taught. And then after the midst of the feast, in John 7:37, it says, "In the last day, that great day of the feast, Messiah stood and cried, 'If any man thirsts, let him come to me, and out of his heart, out of his innermost being, shall flow rivers of living water.'" He shouted that at the libation ceremony and caused a huge ruckus, which is described in the rest of the verses after John 7:37. But John wrote that this was the last day, the great day of the feast. What was the Feast of Tabernacles called in the book of Jubilees? It was called the Feast. It's clear that Messiah was there for the Feast of Tabernacles, just as it states in John 7, verse 2. But then John also wrote that this day was the last day of the feast. And then after all the commotion had settled down, John continues writing, starting with verse 53, "And every man went unto his house, and Yahusha went up to the Mount of Olives. And then the very next morning he came down to the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them." And that was the key right there. Did you see it? Remember, everyone had built their tents, their booths of palm tree branches, willow tree branches, and other goodly tree branches. And they lived in those tents for the entire 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. We do not add to the word, we do not remove from the word. So they're going to dwell in those tents for 7 days. Then what did it say that they all did after that last great day of the feast? Every man went back to his own house. They didn't go back to their booths that they'd made. Every man, at least those who lived in and around Jerusalem, they all went back to their regular beds in their own houses. And when you look in the Greek, the word for house, G3624, oikon, is a completely different word than what is shown for tent or booth or tabernacle, G4633, skene. Completely different. And house, G3624, is defined as a dwelling, a home, a house. Just what you would expect. It's where the family lived. What did Messiah do? John states that Yahushua went up to the Mount of Olives. He likely went to stay in one of a number of natural caves that are found in the Mount of Olives, such as the Grotto of Gethsemane, which is right across the street from the Garden of Gethsemane if anybody's been to Jerusalem. Why would these details be in there that people went back to their homes and Messiah went to the Mount of Olives? Because John is stating the change in the location for where everyone was sleeping from the tents that everyone had dwelt in for the feast back to their normal sleeping arrangements. John chapter 7 tells us that they had celebrated the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days. And at the end of the Feast of Tabernacles, after the last day, the seventh day, that great day of the feast, anyone that could go back to their houses went back to their houses. The Feast of Tabernacles was over. So with John telling us that the Feast of Tabernacles is over and everyone went to their houses, what day is he telling us? In the very next verse, John 8, verse 2. And then, early in the morning, Messiah came back into the temple, and all the people came unto him, and he sat down and taught them. This is not a trick question. The next morning, after the seventh day of Tabernacles, was the eighth day. And the eighth day is not the last great day, because the last great day is shown as the seventh day in the Feast of Tabernacles. It says so right there in John 7:37 and 7:53. It's that simple. So what does that mean? That means from John 8 verse 2 through John 10:21, those chapters and verses declare the prophetic teachings and the good works of Messiah during the eighth day. Messiah is in the temple speaking on the eighth day, the day of addition, the finale of the feasts of Yahweh. And he is the prophet of Deuteronomy 18:18. And so what was he speaking about on that day? He was teaching them, of course, but he was also prophesying about the eighth day. And so now that we can understand the context of these chapters in John, we can start to understand more about the eighth day from what he spoke of on the eighth day. He provided further witness of himself as the prophet and as I am. He healed a man that was born blind, which is symbolic, especially for these last days. That was the day of the event of the woman that was caught in adultery, and it showed that judgment will be righteous and full of mercy. And then he spoke several things concerning judgment directly. He said these things, "You judge after the flesh, I judge no man," right now. "And yet, if I judge, my judgment is true, for I am not alone, but I and the Father that sent me. I have many things to say and to judge of you, but him that sent me is true, and I speak to the world those things which I have heard of him. Truth, I say unto you, whoever commits transgression is the servant of iniquity. And the servant abides not in the house forever, but the Son abides forever. I seek not my own glory, but there is one that seeks and judges." And then Yahushua finally said, "For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see might not see, and they which see might be made blind." That statement was directed in person as a warning to the Pharisees. But anybody else that is righteous in their own eyes, that has too much pride in their own knowledge, in what they think they have understood, but are drifting away from the truth of his word, the warning is also for them. They which see might not see, and they which see might be made blind. What does this mean? He's talking about judgment. He's speaking prophetically about the eighth day. He's warning us about the final judgment that's coming. In Revelation, that final judgment is seen as the great white throne and all of the events around it. It's the time of the final judgment for Hasatan, Satan, the devil. When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan will be set loose for a short season. And then the devil that deceived the whole world, time and time again, he will be cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet already had been for 1,000 years. This is the timeline. The millennial kingdom is the seventh millennial day. You can see some more about that in the Feast of the Seventh message. And the great white throne is after the 1,000 years of the seventh millennial day, which means that it's the beginning of the eighth millennial day. And I saw a great white throne and him that sat on it, and from whose face the earth and heaven fled away. So we're seeing right there the transition from the current earth and heavens to the promised new earth and heavens at the time of the great white throne. Somehow he is going to do that. The important thing to understand is that Messiah is stating through his prophetic teaching on the 8th day that this final judgment, the great white throne, happens at the 8th millennium, at the finale, at the end. And the sea gave up the dead, and hell and death were delivered up. And all that were not in the book of life, and hell and death, were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the final judgment. And after 7 days, the world that has not yet awakened shall be raised up, and all that shall die that is corrupt, and the earth shall restore those that are asleep in her, and the Most High shall appear upon the seat of judgment. Misery shall pass away, long suffering shall have its end. The day of judgment will be the end of this age and the beginning of the immortality to come, in which corruption has passed away. This perfectly aligns with what we just saw in Revelation, a true second witness. In Psalm chapter 9, verse 1 in the Septuagint, for the end. Yes, the Septuagint tells us which of the Psalms are prophetic Psalms for the end times. For the end, concerning the secrets of the Son, he has prepared his throne for judgment, and he will judge the world in righteousness. He will judge the nations in uprightness, and then those that know your name hope in you. For you, O Yahweh, have not failed them that have diligently seek you. Let the transgressors be driven away into Hades. And we see that again in Revelation. I saw a great white throne, and him that sat on it. The dead were judged out of the things which were written in the books according to their works, and whosoever was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. Remember that Leviticus 23:36 defines the 8th day as the finale, meaning that this is the time of the end. At the time of the end, he is finished putting all things under his feet. And in 1 Corinthians, it also says, then comes the end. He shall have delivered up the kingdom to Elohim, even the Father, when he shall put down all rule and authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death. All of these scriptures are perfect witnesses to the others. He has put all things under his feet, that Elohim the Father may be all in all. And death and hell were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death. So when Messiah is teaching on judgment on the 8th day, he is tying it all together for us prophetically with what was going to be shown to John in his vision and written down in the book of Revelation at the end with the great white throne judgment. That's pretty incredible, isn't it? He is the prophet. But that's not all. There are actually more prophetic shadows concerning the 8th day when you look at Genesis together with the book of Jubilees. Jubilees recounts the same events that Genesis does, but sometimes gives us a few extra details, such as what days certain events happened on. So reading from Genesis chapter 35, and Elohim appeared to Jacob once more, and Elohim blessed him. And Elohim said to Jacob, thy name shall not be called Jacob, but Israel shall now be your name. And he called his name Israel. So the Almighty changed Jacob's name to Israel. Ever wonder why? Well, here is part of the reason. Jubilees chapter 31 recounts the same event, but then also tells us that the Almighty actually changed Jacob's name to Israel in the 7th month on the 22nd day. Yahweh appeared to him by night and blessed him and said unto him, thy name shall not be called Jacob, but Israel shall thy name. The 22nd day of the 7th month is the 8th day. Yahweh changed Jacob's name to Israel on the 8th day. In Luke 2:21, it was also on the 8th day of Messiah's earthly life when his name was called Yahusha. Both events are prophetic shadows to the promise that Messiah makes to us in Revelation chapter 2. He that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit said unto the assemblies. To him that overcomes, I will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knows, saving him that received it. A new name. His promise is certainly that the overcomers in the first resurrection and the rapture will receive new names. But the prophetic shadows also shows us that the overcomers of the world that are found in the second resurrection, such as those that live in corruptible bodies during the millennial kingdom, will also receive a new name. on the 8th day. What else did Jubilees tell us about on the 8th day when Jacob's name was changed to Israel? On the 8th day, Jacob resolved to build that place and to surround the court with a wall and to sanctify it and make it set apart forever for himself and his children after him. What was Jacob shown? That he resolved to build a sanctified place, a place of worship with a wall, and make it set apart forever and ever for himself and his children. He likely saw the same thing that John saw from Revelation 21. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the set-apart Jerusalem, that place, descending out of heaven from Elohim, having the glory of Elohim, and had a wall great and high. And there shall no wise enter into it anything that defiles, as Jacob wanted to do, sanctify it and make it set apart forever. But they which are written in the Lamb's book of life, which is for himself and his children after him, the children of Israel. Now continuing with the next verses in Genesis 35. And Elohim said to Jacob, I am thy Elohim, increase and multiply, for nations and gathering of nations shall be of you, and kings shall come out of your loins. And it shall come to pass that I will give this land also to your seed after you. And Elohim went up from Jacob from the place where he spoke with him. And then continuing on in parallel with the next verses in Jubilees, we see it's the same time. It's still the 8th day, and just after Jacob was renamed to Israel, and he said unto him again, I am Yahweh, who created the heaven and the earth, and I shall increase you and multiply you exceedingly, and kings will come forth from you. That's what Genesis also said. And now here's more of the promise. And they that come from you will judge everywhere, wherever the foot of the sons of man trod. And that will happen during the 7th millennial day, during Messiah's 1,000-year kingdom. And Jubilees continues, and after that, after the time of Messiah's millennial kingdom, meaning the 8th millennial day or the 8th day, those that are the seed of Israel, they will get possession of the whole earth and inherit it forever. And Yah finished speaking with him and went up, and Jacob looked till he had ascended into heaven, thus concluding Yah's visit to Israel now just as Genesis did. So, what Jubilees just told us is that after the millennial reign of Messiah, when all of the land that was promised to Abraham from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean, when that land is returned to Yahweh's people and is the land of Messiah's kingdom on earth, after that time period, after the 1,000 years of Messiah's kingdom, and on the 8th day, they will get possession of the whole earth and inherit it forever and ever. And who are they? Not the sons of Jacob. His name had just been changed. It will be the sons of Israel that will inherit the earth forever, spiritual Israel, the native sons and daughters, and those that are grafted in. And Revelation tells us that indeed a new earth is coming. And on this 8th day, a new heaven and a new earth, the set-apart city, New Jerusalem, coming down, prepared as a bride for her husband. And just as a bride takes the name of her husband, remember, we just saw that on the 8th day, new names will be given. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. They shall inherit the earth forever and ever, just as Yahweh promises in Jubilees. The book of Jubilees is another witness to the promises found in Revelation. The 8th day is the restoration of all things. He that sat upon the throne said, Behold, I make all things new. It is done. It is the finale. We will get to eat from the tree of life. We will get to drink from the pure river of water of life that comes out of the throne. And the 8th day is eternity in the New Jerusalem. Him that overcomes I will make a pillar in the temple of my Elohim, and he shall go out no more. And he shall have the name of the city of my Elohim, which is the New Jerusalem, which shall come down from heaven. And I will write upon him my new name. We will receive the new names that he gives to us. We have earthly names that our fathers and mothers have given us, but we will receive a new name from the one who created us, and we will have those names forever and ever. And they shall dwell in their land which I have given to my servant Jacob. And David my servant shall be their prince forever, and I will establish my sanctuary in the midst of them forever. We know this is speaking of Yahushua HaMashiach, who is our king forever. Why is he named David here? Yes, his earthly lineage from his mother comes from David, but there's one more thing. David was the 8th son of Jesse. The 8th. The 8th day is eternal joy. All of our pain and our sorrow, our suffering, our trials and our tribulations, they will be gone. We will forget the former afflictions that we've had, and those things shall not come to our minds any longer. Reading from Isaiah 65. There shall be a new heaven and a new earth, and they shall not at all remember the former, neither shall they come at all into the mind, but they shall find in her joy and exaltation. For behold, I make Jerusalem a rejoicing, and my people a joy. And I, Yahweh Elohim, shall rejoice in Jerusalem, and shall be glad in my people. There shall no more be heard in her the voice of weeping or the voice of crying. Isaiah chapter 65 is a second witness to the prophecy and promises that are found in Revelation 21. They say the same thing. I saw a new earth and heaven. The first heaven and earth were passed away. There's no more pain. The former things are passed away. Behold, the temple of Elohim was with men. He shall dwell among them. They shall be his people. And Elohim himself shall be with us forever and ever, and he shall wipe away our tears from our eyes. And there shall be no more death, no more sorrow, no more crying, no more pain. What a promise. Everything we're going through right now will pass away forever and ever. And as Paul wrote, eye has not seen, nor ear heard, neither has entered into the hearts of men the things which Elohim has prepared for them that love him. Isaiah 64 is where Paul got that. From of old we have not heard, neither have our eyes seen, and Elohim beside you and your works which you will perform to them. And of these promises that he's made for them that wait for mercy, for these blessings shall happen to them that work righteousness. Those that listen to him, those that hear and obey, have the faith and the testimony of Messiah, and they shall remember your ways. And now to show one final witness to the end of Revelation, the statement and the prophecy that brings together everything that we've seen about the 8th day for perfect understanding. Going back to Genesis chapter 1 at the very beginning, the 3rd verse into the scriptures, Elohim said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And Elohim saw the light, and it was good. And this was the first day. This was before the 4th day when the sun was created and the moon and the stars. The first day there was light. The light was created, and it was good. And you might have wondered, what is that light on the first day? But the correct question is, who is that light? In Isaiah 60, the prophecy states that at the end times, you shall no more have the sun for a light by day. You shall not have the moon rising to light your night. But Yahweh shall be your everlasting light. It shall be him, and he shall be your glory. For the sun shall no more set. The moon won't be eclipsed. He shall be your everlasting light, and the days of your mourning and sorrow shall be completed. The people shall also be all righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, preserving what they have done, all of their works, the works of their hands, for his glory, for his purposes. So this is something that's been prepared for those who have attempted to do his will, to follow his word, to be righteous, doing good works, loving others, and loving him the way he asked to be loved. And at the end of the book of Revelation, it states that the city, the New Jerusalem, will have no need of the sun, neither the moon to shine in it. For the glory of Elohim, he will lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof, and they shall reign forever and ever. And what did Messiah say in John chapter 8, verse 12? On the 8th day, he said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. His statement on the 8th day ties together Genesis 1, the prophecy in Isaiah chapter 60, and Revelation 21. He is the light of life that was created. He physically manifested on that first day from the Spirit of the Father to be the light of the world, the light of life, from day one of creation. From that first day of creation, he has always been the light of the world, the light of life. He still is, and he is going to be the light of life for the New Jerusalem at the end and for all eternity. And when he is speaking on the 8th day in John chapter 8, he said, I am the light of the world, ego eimi, just as he said, before Abraham was, I am. And when Moses was before the burning bush and asked his name, he said, I am. the burning bush whose fire was not quenched, the light of the world whose brightness will never dim. The 8th day is the day that never ends. The Lamb is that light thereof. There shall be no more night. Darkness is gone, no more candles, neither light of the sun, for Yahweh Elohim has given them light. I am the light of the world, and you shall be with me forever on the 8th day. The prophet has spoken. The prophet, Messiah, our Savior, Yahushua HaMashiach, the same I am of the burning bush that spoke the 10 commandments and then wrote them with his finger twice. Those that remember your ways, O Father, those are the ones that will see this glorious New Jerusalem and everything else that's been prepared. Remember his ways. Don't forget our first love. Worship Elohim. Worship the Father. Worship him today in both spirit and truth. Thy law is truth. Thy word is truth. For Elohim so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever will believe in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. That light is come into the world. For everyone that does evil, they hate the light, and they will not get to come to the light. But he that does truth will get to come to the light. And he says, Father, thy word is truth. The Lamb is the light of life and the light of the 8th day in the New Jerusalem. Come to the light. It's a single, continuous message. This is Messiah speaking. And he says, worship Elohim, worship the Father. Blessed are they that do his commandments, the Father's commandments, that we may have the right to the tree of life, that we may enter into the gates of the city, the New Jerusalem. I, Yahushua HaMashiach, have sent my angels to testify unto you these things in the assemblies today. Live forever in the New Jerusalem. And they shall see his face, and they shall reign forever and ever in the New Jerusalem. And the Lamb shall be the light of life to whomsoever that believes in him and overcomes all the things of this world and endures the afflictions of this world to the end and worships the Father in both spirit and in truth and all in love. And to close, we come back full circle to the beginning of the message. Leviticus 23:36 says, And the 8th day shall be a set-apart invitation to you. This 8th millennium, the New Jerusalem, all eternity with the Father and the Son shall be a set-apart invitation to you. And you shall offer yourself in everything that you do and all of your love unto Yahweh. It is the grand finale. It's the time of the ending of the 7th day of the millennial week, the millennial kingdom. But when all of that ends, even the current heaven and earth, something even better begins. Once this week is over and the 7th day is done, the 8th day arrives, and we shall do no work forever and ever. It's a time of eternal rejoicing. That's the grand finale that lasts forever and ever. That's his invitation for the 8th day that was given to us all the way back in Leviticus 23. He told us the beginning from the end, and then our blessed Savior showed us the way to get there. That's his invitation to each one of you. I pray that you will grab a hold of that invitation because time is short and we must purify our hearts and make our steps according to what he laid out for us from the beginning on the narrow and difficult path. Because when you do that, when you walk that walk in faith and love with the testimony of our Savior and in obedience to our Father, then you are guaranteed that he will choose you. He will put you on his VIP list, the Book of Life, and you will be chosen to live with him forever and ever. That is his promise to each one of us. That is the 8th day invitation. Thank you, everyone, for listening. May Yahweh bless you and keep you.